How much protein do you need to get swole as We're gonna dive deep into the research and we're gonna start right now. The classic discussion. You sit down and you're going, well, my body can only process 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. If I have any more than 30 grams of protein per meal, I'm just gonna pee it all out. This is a real conversation. This is a real thought that we have. And so where does this stem from and how can we dive deeper into this? Is there research that backs up that that's right or that that's wrong? What is actually true? Is that 20 to 30 grams, is that actually accurate? If we have 31 grams of protein, does our body get rid of that 1 gram of protein? So let's dive into the research and figure out how much protein do we need to get swole as So think about, we just get done this big lifting session, we deadlift, 705, or we do some crazy snatch, right? And we go through the entire workout, and then afterwards, we're trying to get big. So we're gonna eat some protein. So we have to understand what happens when we're eating protein or when we're drinking a protein shake. And so first, the key factor is our saliva plays a massive role in actually starting to break down our food. And then as we consume this food and it enters into our system and into our intestines, what ends up occurring is the constituent amino acids are transported through our intestinal wall and they'll enter the hepatic portal circulation. And any amino acids that are not entered into that hepatic portal circulation will then enter into our bloodstream. And when it enters into our bloodstream, that's when everything is available. So the amino acids are available for our tissues to actually utilize and repair and regenerate and try to promote, stronger muscles and recover from that strength training session. And so this process is more so referred to as muscle protein synthesis, on how our body uses amino acids to increase and recover and improve skeletal muscle. And so the way that we measure muscle protein synthesis is looking at how much of the amino acids that we're consuming are then being used to enhance the skeletal muscle proteins. That's sort of how we can measure that. And that'll be over a time frame of say an hour or 1 day. And then that's got to be compared to muscle protein degradation. And so think about as well, when we're trying to increase muscle mass, we're always on this seesaw that's balancing between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein degradation. They are both always occurring, but one is always going to be a little bit more prevalent than the other. And so they're happening no matter what. There's times when muscle protein degradation throughout the day will increase and override our muscle protein synthesis. But ideally, to be as swole as we possibly can, we have to cater that seesaw in favor of muscle protein synthesis. And so this is one of my favorite lines from a study that sort of really plays this out. And this is not my words, this is way too intelligent. The plasticity of skeletal muscle is mediated, at least in part, by the constant turnover or remodeling of muscle protein. The turnover and remodeling and enhancing the muscle proteins. And in this regard, 2 metabolic processes occur: muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. Now, both act concurrently, so they happen at the exact same time in response to various stimuli to repair, replace, and generate new muscle proteins, leading to phenotypic adaptations. So that's a scientific version of what I had just said, but it's both of these things are happening at the exact same time. And so now we've got to understand, how can we tip that scale in favor of muscle protein synthesis? And to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and the actual remodeling, we have to understand what are satellite cells and their impact on muscular growth. What are the different types of hypertrophy that are actually occurring? And then what type of training can stimulate each type of hypertrophy, which then leads to the greater levels of muscle protein synthesis, which then leads to our individual goals. And so if we look at muscular hypertrophy is growing the actual muscle belly. So we're focusing on our pecs, for example. I'm gonna hit a couple sets of bench press. That's gonna break down, or in essence, that also might lead to some vibrations, which then my body analyzes and then proliferates and mobilizes satellite cells, which then lead into the muscle and increase the actual strength of the muscle or the remodeling of the muscle. So that's how satellite cells can play into the entire role behind muscular hypertrophy. Okay, your body releases some nitric oxide and then it signals to the satellite cells, hey, we need your help here in your pecs. and let's get a little bit bigger. And there's 3 other means behind increasing overall muscular hypertrophy. So there's gonna be myofibrillar hypertrophy. There's gonna be sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is essentially just increasing the size of the muscular cell. And then there's also connective tissue hypertrophy. So think about specific types of training that you might be doing to increase your tendon strength. Some people who struggle with bad arthritis or who have had burns or anything like that, they might be prescribed a drug like nandrolone to increase their collagenous hypertrophy. And that plays a significant part in how much your actual body and muscle belly is going to grow as well. So think about satellite cells, myofibrillar hypertrophy, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, collagenous hypertrophy, and how that plays in regard to muscle protein synthesis. Think of bodybuilders are achieving this substantial amount of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. They're just huge hulking individuals with very, very large muscular structure. Think about myofibrillar hypertrophy is more like a weightlifter. The weightlifter's legs and their glutes and their hamstrings, and even to a point their traps. And think about this. This is a definition of myofibrillar hypertrophy. It's defined as an increase in the size and or number of myofibrils, accompanied by an increase in sarcomere number or sarcomere protein abundance directly related to the structure or contractile force generation of the muscle. So myofibrillar hypertrophy is what we're looking for if we're a power lifter in a bodyweight class, if we're a weightlifter in a bodyweight class, if we're a fighter and we're in a bodyweight class. But now we have to understand what's the role of exercise, the role of myofibrillar or sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and its impact on muscle protein synthesis. Now, this is a lot of research where Brad Schoenfeld has done a really phenomenal job, along with contribution from Alan Aragon. And so what they've done is sort of broken down, if we can think about and understand muscle protein synthesis, and then we can understand the types of hypertrophy that occur in muscular structure. Now we can break down and understand if we do isolation movements versus compound movements, how much protein do we need? How much protein is actually going to be coming into play? And that's going to have a difference. That's going to have an impact. If we do, 10 sets of back squats versus 10 sets of leg extensions, is the amount of protein, is it going to be localized to that area? And is there going to be a greater impact if we do more compound movements? And we now have a decent scientific comprehension on the impact of it. So let's dive into some of this research and see what they say regarding those specific movements. And so now we're going to actually go into leg extension functionality and research behind the amount of protein needed to recover from leg extensions. And so Schoenfeld actually breaks down ARITA and their study where they go into actual resistance trained subjects over a 12-hour recovery period. So following a performance of multiple sets, there was a moderate repetition leg extension protocol, and there was a total of 80 grams of whey protein that was ingested in one of the 3 following conditions. So 8 servings of 10 grams of protein. So 8 times throughout the day, they had 10 grams of protein. Then there was 4 servings of 20 grams of protein every 3 hours. Or there was 2 servings of 40 grams of protein every 6 hours. And so what this helps us see is, okay, if we have 10 grams versus 20 grams versus 40 grams of protein, which one is more effective? And now we have to remember, the exercise being used was leg extensions. And the results from ARITA showed that muscle protein synthesis was greatest in those who consumed 4 servings of 20 grams of protein. So their conclusion was if we have 20 to 25 grams of protein, that is going to be the best amount of protein following a workout session. Now we have to remember they were focusing entirely on leg extension. So let's dive deeper into this research and dive deeper into the science behind compound movements. So Brad Schoenfeld points out that there's one trial where subjects received 20 grams of whey protein immediately after performing a total body resistance training bout. So during another trial, the same protocol was instituted, but subjects received a 40-gram whey protein bolus following their training. So that bolus means, this is the amount of protein, this is the amount of food that you're going to be consuming post-workout. There's 2 different trials going on, post-workout after compound movements. And these results showed that the myofibrillar fractional synthetic rate was 20% higher from consumption of the 40 grams compared to the 20 gram condition. So in this case, if you're training a full body movement, like we mentioned, back squat, deadlift, power clean, full clean, front squat, single leg squat, something that's using multiple joints, what Schoenfeld found is that there was a 20% increase in myofibrillar hypertrophy based on the group that was consuming 40 grams of protein relative to the group that was consuming 20 grams of protein. So this sort of goes against the ARETA study where they showed 20 to 25 grams. But we have to remember, the exercise impacts that muscle protein synthesis. If we're doing bigger movements, it's clear now that we can see, all right, a little bit more protein actually is going to pay off to a point of 20% increase in that muscle protein synthesis. And now that takes us into the next status, which is going to be, what's the training status of the individual athletes? If we have an athlete that's a world-class individual versus an athlete that's a Joe Schmo that just started training, does their body use protein differently? Does their body adapt differently from leg extensions to a compound movement? It's important that in science that we understand that. If you're training for 2 to 3 years versus training for 2 to 3 weeks, do you need more or less protein? Is your body better or not as effective at muscle protein synthesis? So that's going to impact how much protein we actually want to consume. And so we found that the training status of an individual does indeed impact the amplitude and the duration of the acute response of muscle protein synthesis to resistance-based exercise. And so in the trained state, the acute response of muscle protein synthesis to resistance exercise is more rapid, but shorter lived than the untrained state. So the trained individual's body recovers quicker, but the duration is not as lengthened as the untrained individual. The untrained individual, the body's starting to figure out how to use those amino acids, how to take those amino acids from the bloodstream and get them into the skeletal muscle proteins. But over a longer period of time, that untrained body sort of starts to figure it out and learns how to partition the amino acids. Now, the research also shows us that given the training status clearly modulates the acute response of muscle protein synthesis to resistance-based exercise. It follows that the relationship between the acute muscle protein response to training and chronic muscular growth response to resistance training may be altered over the time course of the training process. So again, if we are an untrained individual, it's going to last longer, but it won't be as rapid. If we are more trained, our body recovers faster early on, but it's not as lengthened. And so you might need, if in the case of a more advanced athlete, that protein, within 30 to 60 to 90 minutes post-workout, it's probably going to help. Yes, there's mechanistic growth factor that is higher, for 36 to 72 hours post-workout, and your body really figures out how to use all those amino acids and partition them into the skeletal muscle proteins. That takes more time if we're an untrained individual. So that does come into play as far as the synthesis rate is concerned. Before we go deeper into the rest of the muscle protein synthesis information, if you need more protein to increase your muscle protein synthesis, head over to earthfedmuscle.com and pick up a container of grass-fed whey protein. This is a product that I developed specifically with the help of my business partner. We created Earth-Fed Muscle back in 2014 to help ensure that our NCAA athletes, our Olympic caliber athletes, our NFL athletes could take this product and pass all their drug tests so there's no bullshit in this product. Again, make sure that you're getting enough protein per pound of body weight, and that makes it a lot easier when you supplement with whey protein once or twice a day, especially post-workout. Click on the link down below, head over to earthfedmuscle.com and pick up your multi-balls today. Now, back to the muscle protein synthesis research. So based off of what Schoenfeld has researched is that if subjects receive a 40-gram bolus versus a 20-gram bolus of whey protein and they do a compound movement, there's going to be a greater fractional synthetic rate for myofibrillar hypertrophy in the 40-gram bolus compared to the 20-gram bolus. Okay, so the compound movement plays a big factor on actually meaning that our body needs more protein to recover from that training stimulus. And this also leads us into understanding the training status for recovery, okay? The training status of the individual. So think about younger athletes or a younger training age. Someone might do more isolation movements in the beginning because they're just starting to learn how to do compound movements. So when they're just starting out to train, maybe they do some machine work. They do just leg extensions or leg curls, and they're not doing heavier back squats or full body compound movements. What research has shown us is that individuals who have trained longer have a bigger spike in their overall reaction to partitioning the amino acids in their bloodstream. It happens faster, it's more rapid. Someone who has a lower training age, it takes a little bit longer, but it happens over a longer duration. Yes, the training age matters, but in most cases, untrained, trained athletes, we're gonna use the protein over a 24 to 36 hour time frame. It's not all about that 60-minute anabolic window that we're always referring to. And so that takes us into how much protein is too much or too little. And that's a key factor that Brad Schoenfeld's going into even further, is how much is too much, how much is too little? Is there too much, is there too little? And what does that mean for our overall recovery? And first we gotta analyze studies from Biolo, Bird, and Witter. These are 3 separate studies that analyze this exact idea: how much is too much, how much is too little. And so resistance-based exercise sensitizes the muscle to the anabolic stimulation of elevated amino acid levels from protein feeding. It's clear that the sensitivity of muscle to amino acids remains enhanced for at least 24 hours following resistance-based training. And so that goes in line with the elevation of mechano growth factor and how that contributes to the partitioning of amino acids for muscular growth. And this takes us back to Schoenfeld's double blind, where one group had 20 grams, one group had 40 grams, and then which one ended up having a higher rate of muscle protein synthesis. And so Schoenfeld breaks down McNaughton's study, where there's a randomized double blind within subject design, where resistance trained men participated in 2 trials separately. So they're separated by 2 weeks. One, they do a training regimen and they consume 20 grams of protein here. And then 2 weeks later, they do the same training regimen, but they consume post-workout 40 grams of protein. And then McNaughton wants to see, but people doing 40 grams, which one improves their overall recovery? Okay, so the next question that Brad Schoenfeld sort of poses along with Alan Aragon is, what happens if we're consuming a large amount of protein, 40 grams, versus even larger? So let's say 70 grams or 80 grams of beef protein. In this case, this is actually what happened. And because muscle protein synthesis is a function between the balance of protein synthesis and protein degradation, both of these variables must be considered in any discussion on dietary protein usage. And so the results showed that the higher the protein intake was, actually drastically improved the whole body anabolic response. So the 70 grams of beef protein eaten as a meal with other macronutrients performed even greater with an anabolic response than the 40 grams. And if we can think back to the study with Arita, where Arita says 20 to 25 grams is the sweet spot, now we're seeing in another study, okay, if we're eating other macronutrients, we have a greater anabolic response to 70 grams of protein, okay? So now we're starting to see this is a massive muddied area. And I think even when we're talking about that massive amount of protein, so 70 grams of beef protein consumption, a lot of people's first instinct is like, oh, well, there might be a greater anabolic response from the 70 grams, but aren't you gonna pee some of that out? And I think it's important first here to understand as well that thermic effect of food is real. So if I consume 100 calories from protein, the thermic effect of food, to break down the actual protein, it's gonna take 20 calories just to break down that protein and possibly use it in skeletal muscle, possibly use it for some energy, but very likely just to use it in skeletal muscle. And so even if we're consuming 70 grams and we have this massive anabolic response to the 70 grams, we're not just gonna pee it all out, we're still gonna use it for other methods and for other uses. And it might be used for energy as well, but because that thermic effect of food, that's why we see typically higher protein diets lead to more lean individuals. And that's gonna take us now finally into this application. We know that compound movements need more protein than isolation movement. We know that training age has an impact on actual recovery and the amount of protein that we need to consume to get swole AF, right? We also know that eating other macronutrients increases an anabolic response if we're consuming a higher amount of protein, right? So consuming 70 grams with some carbs, with some fat, will actually improve our anabolic response. Okay, we also know that muscle protein synthesis and degradation is this sort of constant seesaw. So now how can we actually apply this to training? What does this mean for training? I think first, that big step is going to be training age matters. An individual who's an elite athlete is probably going to need more protein in a day than a younger athlete. So I would recommend here right off the bat, a younger athlete that's training 3 to 4 days a week or lifting in resistance-based training 3 days a week and participating in sports is probably gonna need like 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. Whereas an elite athlete who's training full time is probably gonna need something like 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight or 1 gram per pound of body weight throughout that entire day. So that training age is gonna have that big impact. Then it goes into supplements and meals. What's the application here between supplements and meals? The supplement and meals discussion takes us back to the training age. If you have an elite athlete and they're gonna recover a little bit quicker and use those amino acids faster, it's probably easier if they're consuming whey protein with some milk. You know, if they're consuming that with milk, there's going to be some other macronutrients like fat, like sugars in there, along with the protein. And so their body's going to partition that quickly. But also then later on, you know, 2, 3, 4 hours later, they have a large meal with some carbohydrates, with some fat, along with a large amount of protein to increase and lengthen that time frame of muscle protein synthesis. That anabolic process gets increased, as we've seen with the beef study, over a longer period of time. And so what does that mean? What's the ultimate prescription here? I think that's the big takeaway is like, if you're training in a day, how many grams of protein should you have for each meal? So Bandigan did a lot of research on this, and he's found that elite athletes really do well with that 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. But then what's that mean for a meal? Okay, and Schoenfeld breaks this down. And so the collective body of evidence indicates that total daily protein intake for the goal of maximizing resistance training induced gains in muscle mass and strength is going to be around 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. A recent meta-analysis on protein supplementation involving resistance trainees reported an upper 95% confidence interval of 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And this was in a cohort of young male bodybuilders who were pretty well trained. They've been training for a decent amount of time. And by using that upper confidence interval, we can then see if we're taking in 1 gram per pound of body weight, that's going to be, and we're gonna go back and forth between standard and metric here, that's going to be about 0.55 grams per kilogram of body weight per meal. If you're 100 kilos, let's just say it's gonna be about 50 grams to 55 grams of protein per meal. You know, you have about 4 or 5 meals, and that's gonna factor out to 220 grams of protein in a day. If you're a well-trained elite level athlete that's training on a regular basis, you don't even have to be elite, you just have to have that resistance-based training background. If you're a younger athlete, that might end up being about 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So we're using someone who weighs 100 kilos. They're not as well trained. They haven't been in resistance training as long. For them to get as swole as they're going to be consuming about 0.4 grams, so 40 grams of protein per meal throughout that day. And so their protein intake is going to be a little bit lower because their body is not as advanced yet. And so if we have 40 grams of protein, your body still will use that. Okay, and it's likely better if you're a resistance trained athlete to have higher amounts of protein to increase your overall anabolic processes. It's the important takeaways here. Know the different types of hypertrophy. You know, we broke down early on how satellite cells impact recovery, how muscle protein synthesis impacts different size of muscular growth. So sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, myofibrillar hypertrophy, collagenous hypertrophy, and how that factors into gaining that muscular strength. And then we can break down, understand your training age. Are you training for more than 2 years? And then understand the impact of isolation movements, leg extensions from the ARETA study versus compound movements. And then start to break down and understand, all right, now let's see if we're consuming other macronutrients, carbohydrates and fats, with a large amount of protein, it's actually going to enhance the way our body responds. So it's okay to have 60 to 80 grams of protein in one bolus, in one sitting. Okay, so understand all those different factors, and ideally, if you're an untrained athlete or you're just getting into resistance-based training, the massive conclusion here is that having 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight for each meal, or 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight for the entire day, is going to be optimal. If you are an elite level athlete or you've been training for a longer period of time and you're doing more compound movements, you should have 1 gram per pound of body weight or 0.55 grams per kilogram of body weight, and that's gonna optimize your overall recovery so that you can get swole as f. And if you need help with this and you're trying to figure out even further, how can I enhance my overall physique? How can I get a little bit bigger? How can I get a little bit more swole? Head over to garagestrength.com and you can pick up our mass builder program to help you increase that size on your arms and increase your overall lean muscle mass. Until next time, freaks, make sure that you cultivate your power. Peace.